Welcome to the video lecture series in History Class 12th. Today, we will be discussing about third chapter which deals with kinship, caste and class in early societies between 600 BCE to 600 CE. In this chapter, we will deal with four subtopics. Those are Mahabharata historical resource, kinship and marriage, social differences, resources and status. Now let's discuss about Mahabharata, a historical resource which gives an insight into social life, political life, economic life and religious life. In addition, the topic contains the critical edition of Mahabharata, who wrote Mahabharata, handling of Mahabharata as a historical resource and Mahabharata as a dynamic text. Mahabharata is a great Indian epic which gives an insight into the social, economic, political and religious history of ancient India. Besides narrating about Kurukshetra war and the fate of the Kaurava and Pandava princes, the Mahabharata contains much philosophical and devotional material in the form of Bhagavad Gita. What does it tell about the social life of ancient India? As far as information about ancient social life is concerned, the Mahabharata is a very important historical resource. It tells us about the fourfold Varna ashram system in which society was divided into four classes. Those were Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishya and Shudra. The Mahabharata also tells us about the ideal occupational rules laid down for these four classes. Prescriptions were often reinforced through Mahabharata stories to get these rules enforced. But these norms were not always followed. Example is Karna, Eklavya and Parshuram. Parshuram, who being a Brahmana, was expected to teach and preach and perform sacrifices, but instead he took to warfare, which was the duty of a Kshatriya. Mahabharata also tells us about the ashram system, types of marriages, role of guru and status of women in ancient society. About political life, the Mahabharata tells us about the emergence of kingdoms like Kuru and Panchal, about kings' absolute powers, about political conspiracies to gain power and also about rules and regulations of warfare. As far as ancient economic life is concerned, the epic insists that economic activities like agriculture, trade and commerce should be conducted on the basis of division of labor, and it was king's foremost duty to promote economic activities, and trade and commerce was well organized. This epic gives an insight into the religious life also. The epic gives information about Vedic gods and goddesses and also about the emergence of new gods and goddesses like Vishnu, Brahma, Durga, etc. It tells us about theory of incarnation, rituals and sacrifices, cycle of birth and death, etc. Maurice Winternitz, a famous historian of Indian literature, wrote about Mahabharata. Just because the Mahabharata represents more of an entire literature and contains so much and so many kinds of things, it gives us an insight into the most profound, depths of the soul of the Indian folks. Now, the critical edition of Mahabharata. An ambitious project of preparing a critical edition of Mahabharata began in 1919 under the leadership of V.S. Sukthankar, which took around 47 years to complete. But two very important things became clear. Number one, there were many common elements in the manuscripts from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and even in Nepal, I mean all over the Indian subcontinent. Second most important thing was there were huge amount of local variations, which shows the formation of social history, which is the outcome of a dialogue between dominant traditions and local traditions. Who wrote the Mahabharata? The original story of Mahabharata was probably composed by charioteer bards known as Sutas, who went to the battlefield along with kings and composed poems about their victories and their bravery. These compositions were orally circulated. During the time of formation of kingdoms like Kuru and Panchal, around 500 BCE, Brahmanas took over to the writing of Mahabharata. Maybe because kings wanted their history to be recorded and preserved, and probably this was the time when old social values were getting replaced by new values. As we can see in Draupadi's marriage to 5 Pandava brothers, when Drupad, father of Draupadi, objected to this marriage, sage Vyas tried to convince him by telling that the Pandavas were in reality incarnation of Lord Indra, whose wife had been reborn as Draupadi. Sage Vyas narrated another incident about a young woman whose prayers were fulfilled by Lord Shiva in the form of 5 Pandavas. After this, Drupad consented to the marriage. What does this suggest then? This suggests that maybe polyandry. Polyandry means a type of marriage in which a woman has more than one husband. So, this suggests that maybe polyandry, which was once common among ruling class, now fell into disfavor amongst the Brahmanas who recorded, reworked and developed the Mahabharata. Around 200 BCE to 200 CE, there comes another phase, that is, when Lord Vishnu was gaining prominence and Krishna, who is one of the most important characters of Mahabharata, is being identified as one of the incarnation of Lord Vishnu. Between 200 CE to 400 CE, large preachy sections resembling Manusmriti were added, which were probably added later. So, a text which originally had 10,000 verses grew to comprise about 1 lakh verses or shlokas. In literal tradition, sage Vedvyas is known as the composer of Mahabharata. Now comes handling the Mahabharata as a historical resource. Generally, historians agree that the Mahabharata was meant to be a dramatic, moving story. Early Sanskrit texts call it Itihas. Itihas means history. So, some historians are of the opinion that the memory of an actual conflict among brothers was preserved in the narrative part and preachy part was added later on. Whenever historians analyze any text, certain elements are being considered by them, like the language of the text, whether it is written in common man's language like Pali and Prakrit, or in Sanskrit, which was the language of the elite class. Now, here in case of Mahabharata, though Sanskrit is used, but this Sanskrit is much simpler than the Vedic Sanskrit. So, it becomes a bit tough to understand that for which social class it is written. Secondly, historians try to find about the author whose opinions and ideas shape the text, and also about the possible date of composition or compilation and the place where they may have been composed. After all these assessment, the historians ascertain its historical significance. Now, in case of Mahabharata, this is again a difficult task since its versions are found in other regional languages with regional variations, and it was composed over a period of about 1000 years. So, definitely not composed by a single person. So, historians usually classify the contents of this present text under two heads. Section 1 containing the narrative part which has stories with often a social message, and second section containing prescriptions about social norms. Now, dynamism in Mahabharata. The epic Mahabharata was written not only in Sanskrit but in a variety of languages like Malayalam, Tamil, etc. Many stories that originated and circulated in a particular region got incorporated in the Mahabharata text. At the same time, the central story was often retold in different ways. It got relived through plays, dance, and other forms of performing arts, and was depicted in sculpture and paintings. Mahabharata is still a moving and dynamic text. As we can see that Mahashweta Devi, who is a contemporary Bengali writer, and she is known to raise her voice against all forms of oppressions and exploitations, she has given a different interpretation of the story of Kunti and her son's escape from Lakshagriha. So, it's an ongoing process.